Hey y'all, this is Coach B with Discover Freedom, and I am so excited to introduce a new webinar series that I will be doing with Miss Catherine. Catherine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Brittany. My name is Catherine Ratcliffe, and I am the owner and operator of Lots Together Stays, but I am also a benefits professional. I own STR Benefits Consulting, which specializes in helping employers find the right payroll benefit solutions for their team long term.
Wow, that definitely sounds like something much needed. And tell me a little bit about your background with your rental properties, just so that way we get the full picture.
Sure. So I bought my first property in 2017 after my mom died. And I really fell in love with the hospitality aspect and the data. I Working in employee benefits and a lot of complicated plans, I looked at a lot of data, but it tended not to be all that happy. Mortality rates are not as fun as, booking windows and ADR and all of those types of things. And the interaction that I would have with clients around accessing their health plans and their issues, it wasn't always, wasn't always the happiest conversations. But when somebody's planning their vacation and they want to know the best place to, get a massage on the beach, or where they should, go for a special anniversary or what have you, I just really fell in love with the ability to do that. And I expanded then into three different markets, because that's my risk management background, is not to have them all in one. And so it made life a lot more complicated, but I loved the nuances with it. So it gave me a team of four instead of a team of one. And I really enjoyed that too, because I got different people perspectives and all the different networks that I would have in each market. Really, I think, helped me grow as a property manager.
That's super cool. I feel like I myself stumbled into vacation rentals a little over 13 years ago. And I would say it's a little bit to your point, it's definitely interesting when you wind up growing into a team. I actually had founded and sold my own business in the past 4 years, so a little bit, and that was a solopreneur. Again, built that team up right before I sold it. And so there's definitely so much fun involved in that. So, uh, again, I want to thank you for doing this webinar series with me and would love to kind of tie all this together and ask what makes this series important for you?
Well, I left a big corporate position where I worked with huge organizations. So, the big five medical carriers, I sat on a lot of their strategic product panels, what would come to market, how would they modify drug listings and cost sharing and that sort of thing. And it was really heavy and big, complicated stuff that, can feel very mundane at the end of it. And I really felt like as I was interacting with individuals within the short-term rental space, I felt like they were really being underserved. And when you're in a corporate model, everything is built around numbers. And so it's case count, how many cases, and in our world, they talk a lot about belly buttons. How many belly buttons are we talking about? And that really grated on my nerves. And because these are actual people that are entrusting you with the well-being of themselves, with their paycheck, if you're coming in and overselling them on products that they don't need, your employers, that this is, you know sometimes it's such a huge event for them when they can finally offer benefits. And I remember talking to a property manager at one of the conferences. I said, "Do you remember the day when you were finally able to say, 'This is the year we're going to offer health insurance to our team?'" And she was like, I'll never forget it. And so to me, whether you have four people or 4,000 people, the decision making that goes into it, that there's a lot of love and respect that you have to give back to that employer to make sure that, they're not being treated just like, well, it's four belly buttons versus 4,000 belly buttons. And so we're not going to pay as much attention to your cancer claim as somebody else's cancer
Mhm.
claim, or your high risk pregnancy. And that was really my why behind it. it's designed to be complicated, but it shouldn't have to be.
Well, and I'm going to be brutally honest. Being the manager of ops and then having my own business, this was all stuff that I tried to run away from, and was also so overwhelming because you just don't know where to start. You don't know what options are out there. You don't know who to trust. And I feel like in speaking to a lot of other small business owners, uh, that's pretty much the same across the board. So I'm really excited to partner with you on this, and maybe we can bring some of this education in paired with your expertise and wisdom and kind of, for lack of better words, like dumb this down, so that way people know what the heck to do. Because in our conversations even before this, it's really scary when you're not doing some of these things and you realize the implications that it can have on your business. And the last kind of piece to that is, so many people in this industry get into it as a hobby and maybe don't take it or think about it as like this is a real business. This is a professional business that you're opening. And so understanding these concepts, knowing where you can find resources and get the help, I think is just so important. This isn't just a hobby. This is a business in the vacation rental industry.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting time frame for us to be doing this too, because I think to that point, a lot of people are doing it maybe as a hobby. Um, and I don't think they fully articulate the values that they hold. And then when they look at how they're operating their business, I think their business or their side hustle or their hobby doesn't align with their values.
Mm.
And over time, that will eat away at your soul. And you don't even realize that it's happening. And so, what I hope we can do with this series is to help people identify the areas where they can bring their business operations around to identify with their individual values, because there is no cookie cutter way to do things. Yes, there's a lot of regulations and it's very overwhelming. I think the thing that's really important for people to know about me is that I'm never going to shame you in you should have been doing this or you could have been doing that. Mistakes happen all the time. When I would work with even big clients, they would have massive errors, whether it was, they forgot to terminate an employee or they didn't file a government, required document and they were scared of penalties. It happens to everybody. And I like to say, yes, we all want to believe that we're a category of one, but there's no problem so big and so complicated that somebody else hasn't, run into that before. And I hope that I can bring some calm in that it's overwhelming, it's giving me anxiety. I know I need to do something about it, but I don't want to deal with it today.
And I can say from our conversations, you definitely are like that. I'm in the same way. Once I sold my vacation rental business, decided to hop into executive and leadership coaching. And it's the same mindset for me of like, how can we serve and help other people? And it's not the you should have this and you should have that. It's like, okay, what's going on and how do we fix it? So we're definitely in the same mindset there about helping people. I'm excited for that.
Yes, me too.
Perfect, perfect. And then I believe you had a hot topic for today. So what are you going to start us with?
Well, I thought we'd start at the very beginning. When you start your business, what are some of the first initial decisions that you need to make to sort of set yourself up on the path to success? And, when I talked to a number of people in the beginning of my transition into focusing benefits on the short-term rental industry, vacation rental industry, it's sort of a similar theme. Like you get told, start an LLC or an S corp or whatever you're going to do, open a bank account, get a credit card, like that's what you do, and that's the end of the education. And um, and I think it gets really overwhelming fast. And I think anybody who's ever started a business starts from a very grassroots, bootstrapped position of I've got to do everything myself. And then when you need to branch out a little bit for anything, like there are moments when I need to ask my husband to call a guest or do something, and it's just more complicated for me to even explain to him what I need him to do because you maybe haven't written down an SOP of like, well, this is what happens. This is what this means. And so I think if we just start with, how do you start documenting that process and looking at some of the whys around, how you even pay yourself, if you pay yourself, right? And I was working on a session this morning before we got together, and it was specifically talking about, empowering women through benefits. And I think a lot of times, we look at things and it's like, oh, I'll just have you as a 1099. I'm going to, send you this W-9 and you fill this out, because the contractor versus the W-2 employee relationship is really scary for a lot of people. And especially that first time you're asking for help, you're like, I don't need a full-time employee. Like, I only want 4 hours. That's what I want, is 4 hours a week. And I'm afraid that if I make you an employee, one, I don't know how to do that. And then two, I don't know what that sets me up for. And so the first thing that I always say when somebody says, oh no, my people want to be 1099, I always say, no, they don't. Like, they don't. The only reason somebody wants to be a 1099 is if you're paying them less than $600 and they're hoping you're not going to file a 1099. That's it. So if you're paying somebody $150, then okay. But outside of that, if you're looking for something that is more than a one-hit wonder, they're not hoping to be a 1099. And I think from a regulatory perspective, you need to understand that that's one of the fastest ways that you can kind of get burnt as an employer,
Mm.
or as a business, is to have somebody misclassified as a 1099 versus a W-2. It's really hard to classify cleaners as 1099 workers, if you're paying the person that cleans for you, if you are making them take any kind of training course. And there's a lot of courses out there that people are asked to take. In the state of Florida, it's required that your cleaners take human trafficking training under
Mhm.
DBPR. So even just with that, it starts to get you into a gray zone of, I'm requiring this. So the reason why somebody would want to have a W-2 employee relationship versus a 1099 starts with taxation. So, and when we talk about women in benefits and empowering people on any sort of marginalized category, the minute you're paying their Social Security tax for them, or paying into Medicare for them, you're giving them a form of protection. So your commitment can just start with, I'm paying unemployment insurance for you, I'm paying your Social Security employer responsibility tax and your Medicare tax, and I'm covering you under my workers' compensation. And that's what I value in you. You can start just there. People think of a W-2 transition into like, I've got to offer major medical insurance and a retirement plan and PTO. You don't. You can really just start with that principle. And you should start that principle for yourself, right? You should be paying all those things for yourself as well.
So my brain has so many questions about this. Um, what happens when you are starting your business and cash flow is very tight? And so you decide, hey, I'm not going to pay myself for the first 6 months until the business does start, generating cash and everything like that. Is it there any issue with that?
Well, on paper, I know, first, I'm not an accountant, but what I will say is I think you want to look at how you're paying your expenses. Because what a lot of us do is we'll place an order for something, whether it's your tech or it's towels or whatever it is, and you're paying it on a personal credit card, and or you're reimbursing the company or paying for something for the company out of your personal funds. So there's a way to just have the money transfer in a circle so that the government gets their piece. And that's ultimately what's going to get you in trouble the most, is a government that's looking for their piece of that. So you paying your American Express card out of a corporate account, like that starts to, yes, you can true it up at tax time, but you're not truing up unemployment tax. You're not truing up any kind of Social Security or Medicare taxes. You're only, truing up the income tax. And so that's where you can run into some trouble with some of that. And then if you're, in Florida, we don't have a lot of state mandates, but outside the state of Florida, there's a lot of locations that do have very, very specific paid sick leave policies, paid time off policies that can apply if you're just one person. And they're state funded programs, so you're paying it through a payroll tax. And so when they're not seeing that that's getting paid in, so they're seeing there's a company that's filing their annual documents, but there's nothing coming in over here on this state mandated, disability policy or what have you. That's how you can get burnt and get into a lot of penalties. And those penalties can be really expensive. They can be completely divorced from what your revenues are. So I had an employee who was living in Florida, but had her primary residence was Buffalo. And all the work she did for us was in Florida. And so we were paying state unemployment and workers' comp and everything was in Florida, but we weren't doing a zero earnings report to the state of New York and Buffalo. Buffalo has its own city county rules, and we got hit with a $2,000 per quarter fine, which was more than this person made. Like, it was ridiculous. It was a part-time employee. So you can run into some really expensive mistakes just because you were trying to cut that corner of, I don't feel like I have enough money to pay myself. And so you don't need to pay yourself a lot. You just need to pay yourself minimum wage. And then you can loan yourself back the money and just do that. But then you're at least getting unemployment boxes checked with the various entities that are going to be looking for that. And they do go looking. They'll do these audits of, here's everybody that's got in Florida, it's a SunBiz filing, your LLC or your S Corp that you've got to do on an annual basis. And if they're not seeing anything coming in, that's the biggest red flag that she'll see is, well, how are they generating any kind of revenue?
That's crazy. That's a lot. So tying into what you were talking about earlier too, we may have viewers in all sorts of different states in America. So when you are trying to figure out as pay yourself and hire more employees or even, virtual assistants if you're hiring across state lines and stuff like that, like what is the best recommendation you could give for somebody as far as how they can understand what the requirements are for 1099 versus W-2.
So 1099 versus W-2 for the most part is determined federally. So that's the biggest thing. And so there's a guideline that talks about what the employment relationship is. So a lot of people will say, well, here's your W-9 and here's your 1099 contractor agreement where you agree that this is not an employment situation. And for a long time, I think that was probably good enough. I think you run into situations where, are you requiring that that person has their own workers' compensation? Are you ensuring that they're licensed and they're bonded and all of the things that you have to do to make sure that that's truly the case? The definitions then come down to the work that they're performing for you. So if it's me, Catherine Ratcliffe, that is always coming to clean for you, Brittany, every Saturday between 10 and 4, and you're a business, and my job performance directly impacts your revenue. If you have the ability to say, Catherine, you missed this, you didn't do that correctly, or I need you to go back and redo the bathroom. Like, those are things that actually happen in an employment situation. So that you're functioning, you're treating that employee, you're supervising that person like an employee. They're less
Mhm.
a contractor. Like my lawn guy that comes in and goes out, he's a contractor, right? My pest control company, not always the same person that comes. Sometimes it is, but not always the same person. And I'm not paying directly to that individual, I'm paying to an organization. So that's where you want to think about, how am I paying this person? And I think too, if you're unaware of those, right, if the reason why you don't want to make them a W-2 employee, take, say, for example, a social media marketer. You want a social media marketer for 15 hours a month, and you just want them to do this scope of work, and you don't want to bring them on as a W-2 employee because you're afraid, you don't know really where they live, and you don't know what the rules are, and they don't need to be here because they're not a cleaner. The question is, do they know the rules? Because when they get fined, or if they get fined, the first thing they're going to say is, this was your fault because you're the one that paid me. So I would look at payroll systems that make your life a lot easier. And I think it's one of those small ROIs that you can work through, where it'll give you a flag and say, hey, this person is in Oregon and they have a paid leave policy that you've got to pay into, or this person's in New York and they've got state leave and you need to pay into that. And just for, understanding, you're talking about items that are like $5, $8. They're not like huge ticket items. I've got to pay hundreds of dollars a month for this person. And that's why it's so important, I think, to not ignore it, because the flip of it is you could absolutely be hit with a $2,000 fine for not paying a $5 a month premium. And you don't want to be in that situation. That's silly.
No, that's all great info. So you referenced payroll systems as a resource. So what do some of those look like?
So virtually everybody offers payroll services. I think when you think of payroll, the people that you see, big commercials for are, Workday and ADP and UKG, and they tend to sponsor a lot of sporting events, and that they're really expensive and they're designed for big, big companies. You're probably going to have more than you would ever need. It's probably more than you could possibly afford. And the last thing you want to do as a newer business is to jump into a mess of 1-800 I can't help you, right? Like that's not what you're looking for. So you can start with, whether it's QuickBooks or a regional PEO, that is going to charge you, anywhere from $8 a check to, a percentage of payroll. It just kind of depends on where you are, what you need, how many people, and how much you pay them. I have just myself on my payroll for one of my plans, and then one of my companies, and then for my other company I have 5 employees. And they're part-time, I'm full-time because they're my cleaners and they don't
Mhm.
work 40 hours. But my PEO handles all of my quarterly wage and tax filings for me. They do all the I-9 verifications. They do all the things that I think I would probably forget to do, not do correctly, or, complain about doing on a Saturday morning and ruin my cup of coffee. So for the $8 a check or whatever it's going to be, it is absolutely worth it to do that. And then I have a dedicated resource that can say, what do I do about the fact that this person, because I'm in 2 states, so I've got employees in Georgia and I've got to keep up with what the laws are for any kind of, paid leave or anything like that comes about. And that's a really good way to start if all you're doing is payroll.
I love that. And I'll add in, when I had my own business, I used QuickBooks. At the business that I was with prior, we did use a local PEO. I can't remember the name of it anymore. But to your point, like there's nothing worse than starting out and okay, maybe you have your stuff together and you can do the paperwork and this and that. But then as you get the second, third, fifth, 10th, more and more employees, like all of that becomes just daunting.
Oh
And
yeah.
then God forbid you have an issue or an obstacle when it comes to payroll, then you're the one having to figure all of that out. And it's awful. So I definitely tapped in when we had that the original company, and then even with QuickBooks, they walked us through everything. Hey, you need this form, you need that.
Mhm.
Made that automation. Was it expensive for a small business? Yes, but to your point, like it was going to be so much more expensive if I just thought, oh, I could do it and miss something and then had gotten slapped, with something worse. So I would definitely, in kind of thinking back to even your original statement, like when you are creating a business and or growing, scaling a business, like it's so important to really think about that. Like, how are you going to pay your people? How are you going to keep up with all of that information, their time, their PTO, the more and more benefits that you include in, like I feel like that's where some of these softwares and systems can really help instead of trying to just Zelle somebody some money once a week.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, like there's so many tech systems out there now where your cleaner, they start a job, they end a job, they upload pictures, that sort of thing. But there's really nothing that's saying like they worked this amount of hours, right? And I think that's where in a small business environment where we're not hitting any kind of like there's probably nobody that you had that was a salary based employee, right? Um Everybody was probably hourly because it's unusual for smaller businesses to have people that meet that salary threshold, and that is set by the federal government as to whether or not you can call them salary or hourly. So those were some big changes that were coming in. Some of the decisions got reversed. I think we were talking earlier about, how do you navigate a workforce in an era of total disruption because rules are changing faster than we can keep up. But they had set the salary threshold that was supposed to go into effect for January 2025 was going to be over $58,000. So what a lot of people used to do is they would just say, "Oh, I'm going to call you salary, and that way I don't need to track your hours." Well, the Fair Labor Standards said, "I don't think so. That's not how that works." So they went back and they said, "No, you need to track hours for people that hit these different categories. One of them is pay. It's not the only one that is a
Mhm.
qualifier." So for the most part in this industry, people are going to be considered hourly workers, and you need to keep track of their hours because you don't ever want somebody, one, you want to have a very clear description of what that person's doing, right? So with the hurricanes, for example, there was a lot of communication going on between property managers and teams, right? Like, is all the furniture brought in? Have we communicated with the guests? Did we bring down, what's going on? We're being evacuated. Like all of that communication, that's work that needs to be compensated for. And there's different rules around weather and emergency situations and whether or not you need to pay that person based on what their job classification is. So you really want to go back to once you decide, all right, I'm going to start this business and I'm going to start tracking what I do so that I can ask somebody for help. And I always use the hit by a bus strategy. If I'm hit by a bus tomorrow, does my husband or whoever is working with me, do they have any idea what needs to be done next? Right. And so that's where starting that written communication, because I'll forget this time next year what I should be doing. Oh yeah, I've got to write, I've got to do all my 1099s. I've got to renew all my SunBiz applications. I've got to do all of these things. It starts to be a lot when you write it down. And once you start writing it down and figuring out what can be delegated out, that starts to form a job description. And that job description is what you're going to use to track the hours that are being spent on different tasks. So we've been to conferences where there's lots of vendors that are talking about their product that's going to revamp your operations and make it so much better, right? But if you don't have a process written out or you don't
Ugh.
have a job description written out, you are about to be sold because you don't have the information to use their product. And it might be the best product on the face of the planet, but if you don't have the information to put into it, then you can't use it. So you want to start from day one with tracking all of that information. And then that job description goes to help with your workers' compensation coverage. So again, if all I do is social media marketing for you, why would I ever be out doing debris removal after a hurricane? Right? Like, because that's not my job description, and you're not paying workers' compensation for me to do that. And conversely, if I've got social media marketing, um, why why is my job directly impacted from an unemployment situation if it has nothing to do with the fact that you physically can't get into the property, right? So you're preparing a defense for workers' comp claims and
Mm.
unemployment claims if that happens with your team, where you can say, well, this is the job that they were supposed to be doing. And it helps you measure their performance. They're, being able to evaluate, this cleaner's not spending enough time there. Um, all of those things build out into those systems and help you reduce your human capital investment, your insurance claim costs, things like if you've got a process. So we switched from bromine to chlorine at our hot tub in Georgia. And that's a whole thing, right? Like you need to really understand what you're doing with that. It's not a simple thing. Because you have to really flush that hot tub or you can have a chemical burn. And so if, for the sake of argument, I had somebody who hadn't been trained. I had somebody who didn't do it properly, and I had a claim. This is where like insurances will talk to each other and they'll say, "What did you do up front? How did you make sure that Catherine was qualified to do this?" And that's where you start to identify across your business which insurance policy is going to cover, right? So is this a liability policy? Is it a workers' comp policy? Is it something for the guest? It depends on what you had going on. I think a lot of people underinsure in the wrong places. And they really invest in these massive liability policies because they get sold the concept that, everybody's going to sue. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but you also need to have workers' compensation because the first thing your liability carrier is going to say is they're going to say, was this cleaner an employee? Should you have had workers' compensation on them? Is this their insurance that should be paying? So that's another way that if you don't have it outlined correctly and it's not clear, that you can run into a really messy situation just from a process and procedural perspective.
That's all so important, and definitely things that, to be honest with you, when you're starting a business and running a business, just go
Yep.
until it becomes a problem. I was writing down as you were talking, I think maybe on future webinars, we can talk about job descriptions and really explore into that. Just some of the things you were saying, I was like, oh, I didn't really do that in some instances. And there were some times when it actually saved us from a couple claims with some things. And then also the importance of SOPs. I think that needs to be its own webinar, especially if you ever want to sell your business. That's huge. So definitely got some good nuggets for some more webinars.
Yeah, and I
So,
think the thing that's really important is it can feel like this is all too overwhelming. And I would say the longer you go without doing it, the more overwhelming it becomes, right? Like it doesn't become less of a problem. It's a lot harder for me to go back and create SOPs for 4 properties than it would have been for one. But if you have to onboard a new employee, it makes that faster, right? If you're switching out cleaners, it makes it faster, it makes it more efficient. But I mean, you can really go down the rabbit hole on any one of these things and really dive into the whys behind it. I think the most important thing is that it is important. It's not something, I know people like to go to the things that are AI driven and, revenue management and even on selling your business, but it's going to come right back to this. This is going to be the starting point. If this isn't right, those other things aren't going to work long term or they're not going to be as profitable.
amen to that. And I don't think I said this earlier, but I really think this was our vision in having these webinars is to talk about and bring back the people side of the business, because to your point, there's so much amazing content and wisdom being shared out there, but we've really lost touch with the people side of the business, like our own people, not the guests, not the owners, not the vendors, not the tech, like not all of that stuff for the business, like the people actually running the business. So one question I have for you, and hope it won't hit too far of the blue, but you converse with a lot of different maybe hosts and property managers within the industry and have very extensive experience and wisdom in this. What do you think is the most common concern or challenge that you come across when working or meeting with new people?
They're afraid of what they haven't done and what it's going to cost them to fix it.
Mm.
So it's fear. Fear is the root of, I think, a lot of inaction, but fear doesn't, avoidance of a problem doesn't make it go away. And I think once they sit down and you can talk through it, they they're able to see a path forward. And everybody's path is a little bit different. That's the one thing that I love about this industry is it is not cookie cutter, right? Like what would have worked for Breathe Easy wouldn't have worked for Lost Together Stays. And that's where we get to bring our own flair to the way we show up for our teams. It really is a unique culture that we each have. And the idea of what made you start your company, what made me start my company, they're very different things. There's not one that's better or right or wrong. It's just who Brittany is versus who Catherine is and the way we show up in those things. And I think once a property manager or a business owner understands that this isn't a heavy regulated, I'm going to, beat you like a hammer to make you comply with all these government regulations, but that this is an opportunity for you to show up for your team and make them feel a greater connectivity to you and your mission, then everything starts to fall into place.
I love that. The biggest thing that stuck out to me was, and I'm going to rephrase your words a little bit, but fear is the driver of inaction. And it is. I see it just in coaching with people on just a personal development side of things. And it's the same thing with that as dealing with PEOs and benefits and payroll and all of that. That's when you said that, I was like, oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think there had to have been so many things that you did with your team that you viewed as taking care of your team, right? Like I think of all the property managers I've talked to, whether it's, we give them a one night stay at any one of our properties or weekend stay at one of the properties. We want to treat them to that, or we give our cleaners a snack pack to take with them on busy days. Like there are so many things that are really, really creative within the industry. But I think we do a poor job of communicating to our team what we're doing for them. And so we think, because everybody has a different, um, I suppose it's love language, but it's also the way of interpreting other people's behaviors, if you don't want to use the term love in that. But and so you providing me with lunch or you providing me with the opportunity to stay at a luxury property, to you, that might seem like a really big investment in me as a team member. But if you're not understanding that the fact that I don't have childcare and I have, celiac disease, and you keep giving me stuff that is filled with gluten and I can't eat it, like we're missing each other 100% because you feel like I don't appreciate all that you've done for me. I worked in an environment where we got awards trips based on sales. And I went to Ireland. And there was another person in a different market who also qualified to go to Ireland. And it was all expenses paid, amazing trip to Dublin, you and your spouse, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't go. And I was like, how are you not going to Ireland? I just couldn't believe it. He didn't have childcare. And
Wow.
so but that was a big ticket item, right? And so I think there's times where you just miss. And, have you leaned into who your team is? Some people are very introverted. They're excellent workers. They're dedicated, but you ask them to run out and do something outside the box that is way outside their comfort zone, they'd rather quit and start a job over again. And so you really have to spend that time learning who your team is before you start misfiring 1,000% on what you think you're giving, and then you're frustrated and you keep trying to do more of it and you're more frustrated and you're just burning yourself out and irritating your staff.
I don't know if you like snuck into my soul last night or what, but all of those things. And I'm going to write that down because I think that is well worth another podcast idea or webinar idea. Because yes, I definitely did that. And I can say I didn't listen to my team. And I'm going to add on to that. Like the interesting thing that I've learned through coach training is that everybody does have very different experiences and patterns that they've created. They come from different places, they have different health conditions. And so everybody perceives something completely different. That's why one event can happen and someone can be crying, someone can be angry, another person can be happy. And if you're looking at it, from a bird's eye view, you're like, what on earth? The same thing's happening, but it is all of that different perception. And I wish I would have done that differently in my past. I've definitely learned a lot in the past year, because again, yeah, you hit the nail on the head with it. And I was not good at doing those things and would love to help other people learn from that mistake before it's too late. So that's all good. Is there anything else? I think we're kind of coming into time. Is there anything else that's important for you to share today?
No, I think, we talked a little bit about what we hoped that everybody would get out of this series. And I think what I hope that they walk away from is that there is somebody else who has, walked this walk before. None of us are perfect. And whether this is you're just dabbling in the idea of starting a business or you've been doing this for 20 years, that it is always a good time to step back, reframe, reevaluate, and create a strategic plan for yourself, for your organization, and for your team, and really think about that holistically. A lot of times you think, I am doing so much for my team and they are just not appreciative, and that can cut you to your core. And I think that's where a great opportunity for people to step back and say, what am I missing? And work through that strategic plan for them, for you, um and figure out how you want to grow. And without just, the easy button is I'm not doing it anymore and just quit. And I think that's a disservice to your guests, to your owners, to the team that you do have. If you can just reframe it and say, hold up, is this a value to you? Is this where you want to be? Some people feel nervous about saying, I only want to do this until my kids, graduate high school, and then I want to move back home, or I want to do whatever. And they don't want to tell you that they've got this internal clock because they don't want you to replace them. And so having that strategic plan of, this is the job, this is the description, this is the person, what is my succession plan for that person? If, they do leave, if something does change, what's my growth plan? What's my exit strategy? All of those things, again, whether this is you're just starting about, getting into the industry, or you've been doing it for 20 years, it's a good time to go back and refresh that.
Yep. No better time than the present. Definitely agree with that. Like I said, I'm so excited and appreciative of you doing these with me. I think we can bring back the people side of hospitality and also bring some education that nobody else is talking about in a way that people can consume it. So definitely thank you. And what is the best way? I know I'll share some information in the notes, but what is the best way if somebody wants to reach out to you?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'm very accessible through email and phone. I think one of the things I learned early on is that when you give everybody your number, they don't use it quite as freely. So it's kind of funny because I think I'm one of the rare people that I put my cell phone number out there all the time. And I don't mind if people call and say, I just want to run something by you. So they can phone me, text me, email me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a conversation.
I love that. I'll definitely share that. And same for me too. I'm all over the place. I remember somebody the one time, I think I like shared my number on Facebook and they private messaged me like, Brittany, what are you doing sharing your number? And I'm like, listen, I get 5,000 spam calls a day. Like, if one of those is actually something who wants to talk to me, like, let's go.
Yeah,
So
it would be a different situation if I wasn't getting the 800 spam calls.
yeah, definitely agree. So awesome. Well, thank you again for your time this morning and can't wait for our next fun series.
Yes, thank you so much, Brittany. I appreciate the opportunity.
Bye.